Hey friends, I want to talk to you today about someone who used to be world beloved and now gets worldwide side eye, other than from the most staunch of royalists and the most corrupt of dictators who are looking for an end to Britain's soft power of the royal family. That is Prince Andrew, also known as the Duke of York. Now, it wasn't always that way. In the 80s, Andrew was a war hero. He was also the Queen's favorite and widely considered by the British populace to be a better choice for king, although whatever supposedly divine powers that decide such things determined that Charles would be born first. Before he married Sarah Ferguson in 1986, Andrew was a Royal Navy helicopter pilot in the Falklands War. At the time, he was very popular in the press as a war hero, as it was reported that he took part in rescue missions, casualty evacuations, and something called missile decoy. I don't know what that is, but it sounds exotic and dangerous, and that's how Andrew was seen back then. In the 80s, during the height of his popularity, the British press was still very deferential to the royal family. Before camera phones, it was easier for the press to do because people weren't able to document and expose things for themselves, so the press could smooth and skew things for the royals without getting called out for it too much. For instance, it's well known now that Diana was taller than Charles, but for their engagement announcement picture and for interviews, they would position Charles and Diana on steps so that Charles would be standing above her and seem taller. These tricks would never work today, as people would be able to document them on cell phones and post on social media anytime they stepped out and show the reality. So, with that being said, it's hard to know at times how much to trust these reports of Andrew's bravery and exploits because the British press were up to much different tricks then than what they are now, and the trick at that time was to keep the royals happy. There are rumors that he was absolutely loathed in the Navy by the servicemen who had to work with Prince Andrew, but you didn't hear about any of those in the press. Now, those rumors would seem more consistent with his character than the glowing reports of his bravery from the 80s press, as palace staff also hated him for his insufferable ways and crazy temper tantrums. Andrew's relationship exploits were the talk of the tabloids, but most of the men writing the stories seemed to kind of approve, and they began calling him Randy Andy. One thing the press couldn't remain silent on or get around, though, was their feelings when Andrew took up amateur photography in 1985 and published a book of his photos. Gene Nocon was a respected photographer at the time and assisted Andrew with his photos, and the press made it really clear that they were positive that the only ones that were decent in the book were Nocon's work, and the ones that they absolutely couldn't bear were Andrew's work. Photography wasn't a widespread hobby then like it is now, and in my opinion, the British press felt like he was infringing on their territory by being a royal taking picture of royals. After all, wasn't that their job? What would they do if royals just photographed themselves and give the information on their own? Now, that same argument has been made in the last decade, as the Princess of Wales, Catherine Middleton, commonly known as Kate, also does amateur photography, and she tends to just provide the press with photos she's taken, as opposed to always allowing them access to come take photos of the family and children anytime it's traditional that a photo would be released. Sometimes she just puts it out there herself and lets them deal with it. I respect her for it. And that being said, I also respect the fact that she respects the fact that those people have jobs to do and that that's their livelihood, and she never fully cuts off the press. Now, back in the day, there used to even be a preferred royal photo developer. It was Wallace Heaton, and that shop was on Bond Street. It was requested at the time that if any friends or family in the royal circle or their vicinity took private photos, that they would have them developed at Wallace Heaton, and because he was considered discreet and trusted, and it was an agreement that he would keep the negatives and only return prints. This tradition seems to have elapsed eventually as the press lost their differential status towards the royals. It appears to have totally gone away these days. Can you all imagine the gems that would be in the Wallace Heaton archives of negatives? Oh my God. Prince Andrew's photography book was published the year before he married Sarah Ferguson, and for a while this marriage got the same press treatment of glowing reviews. Although Fergie was never considered as beautiful or as glamorous as Diana, her personality made her beloved, and reports mention that she was bubbly constantly. Every press report of her from the 80s says that she is bubbly. Well, Meghan Markle has cried on camera and told us about multiple episodes of sobbing on the floor due to things that the press said about her. Fergie's treatment by the press turned whenever she gained weight, and it turned in a nasty way that I don't think Meghan Markle could even fathom experiencing. Headlines called Fergie the Duchess of Pork, and whenever her wax figure was revealed at Madame Tussauds wax gallery, a photographer actually walked up to it with a tape measure and measured its hips. Y'all, Lord. Fergie and Andrew's marriage didn't last long. He immediately went back to sea with the Navy, and Fergie claims she only saw him about 40 days out of the year. Then the infamous topless toe sucking pictures came out in the most dramatic way. Fergie was at Balmoral Castle with the family when the pictures leaked of her in the press, and her financial advisor, John Bryan. Oddly, to this day, it seems like the only thing John Bryan's mad about is that they're known as the toe sucking pictures. He likes to correct that and say he wasn't sucking them, he was kissing them. Apparently that matters to him for some reason. But yeah, whenever Fergie came downstairs, the entire royal family was at breakfast and clearly enraged at the embarrassment she caused them. And she was asked to pack up the children and leave. Further embarrassment compounded for her because she drove 50 miles to a house she owned in Aberdeen. And when she got there, it was surrounded by reporters. There was no staff there to open the gate. She had to ask a detective for help to get inside the gate as reporters were watching and snapping her pictures. This led to a 4-year separation of Andrew and Fergie, and then eventually divorce. My personal opinion, which is based on nothing but pure speculation, being a 1980s millennial who was obsessed with the royal family, reading them in my aunt's tabloid magazines back in the day, I think that Andrew and Fergie likely had already opened their marriage due to the distance and Andrew being away most of the year. I don't think he really cared. There are confirmed reports that Andrew and John Bryan are good friends to this day, as well as Fergie and John Bryan, and the three of them. But Prince Philip was absolutely infuriated at the embarrassment of the pictures, and it's my opinion that he pushed and possibly forced Prince Andrew to divorce Sarah. She wasn't welcome back at any more royal functions until after Prince Philip died. Now, again, this is just my speculative opinion, but I think Prince Philip made the wrong call if that's the case. After the divorce, Andrew went really wild. He developed his reputation as the party prince and put previous Randy Andy reputation to shame. Despite his 2019 protest that I never really have partied in that Newsnight interview with Emily Maitlis that ended his life as now, before he was married, when he was Randy Andy, there was a need to have some sense of restraint and caution about his public actions and with women because he would be marrying and having heirs. And although he may have done some despicable things then, he was clearly, if that was the case, careful enough that they never became public. Now, Randy Andy and his string of arm candy is how the models that he dated in the 80s were referred to. And if he had stayed married to Fergie, I think he definitely would have had affairs, we know that, and would have felt a need for some discretion because although Fergie might not mind, the press and his parents would very much mind if it became public. Now that they're divorced and he already has children, a single Andrew is unleashed on the world, and I think he has no feeling of need to show restraint back then because he's not married, not looking to marry again, already had his heirs, so what does it matter? In my opinion, that's when the beast that does sweat was really unleashed. The Guardian quoted the Daily Record and said that as late as 1996, they were still trying to imbue their coverage with respect and portray his friendships as some kind of cultural safari of the curious mind. Here's the quote of the Daily Record from then. It said, he being Prince Andrew, particularly enjoyed the friendships of the model and actress Katie Rabbit and actress Finola Hughes and the model Claire Park because of the different worlds they opened up for him. The press's protection of the 80s that had crumbled still had a few remnants of structure that didn't want to speculate that an older, privileged, divorced man's dalliances with various young models might have unsavory implications. After their divorce, Sarah Ferguson once joked, "I passed the time running videos while he frolicked with 27 concubines." At the time, that was considered good-natured of her to joke like that, but the term concubine seems a bit sinister now given what we know about Andrew and his association with Jeffrey Epstein. And lest anyone feel too sorry for Sarah, let's keep in mind that when Sarah needed money after some of her lifestyle brands and other companies failed, she went on Oprah and said she was near bankruptcy. Take note there, Meghan Markle. Jeffrey Epstein was one of the people who gave her a loan and prevented her from being the first senior royal to be declared bankrupt. This happened after he had been convicted of soliciting a minor. Sarah claims that she didn't know about this, and afterwards she condemned Epstein publicly. And to her credit, it's reported that Epstein sent a team of lawyers with threats and put great pressure on her to try and get her to retract her public statement about him, but she stood her ground. The prince, who never really has partied, attended Heidi Klum's Hookers and Pimps Halloween party in 2000 with Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's well-known madam, who is currently in prison. Just months later, on March 13, 2001, he was at a gathering at Ghislaine Maxwell's London place, having his picture taken with Virginia Giuffre, with no idea how much that picture was going to cost him later, because without it, Virginia might not have had the leverage for him to settle. Whether anyone believes Virginia is a personal choice, because Andrew hasn't been convicted, and it must be noted that Virginia does have some credibility issues. However, I do believe her, as she has been proven right on some of the instances, and the fact that she accused other powerful men and had to issue retractions. A retraction and lack of conviction doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't happen. It just means she can't prove it. And so she had to retract what she said, in my opinion, allegedly. But it does mean that we can't say for sure that that's settled fact. We can only make our own judgment calls about what we believe happened between Andrew and Virginia. Personally, like I said, I believe her story is consistent with what Epstein and Maxwell were doing at the time, passing out young girls to powerful people like Candy, and also because Andrew's nature as Randy Andy and the Party Prince is settled fact, regardless of what he said on Newsnight. There's too much proof. And I think personally that his sense of royal entitlement was so big, he never really considered any possible consequences. In 2002, Prince Andrew hosted a party at the palace and introduced Ghislaine Maxwell there to people as his ex-girlfriend. And this was 18 months after the picture of Andrew and Virginia was taken at Ghislaine's home. Andrew allowed Ghislaine and Kevin Spacey to sit on the 1953 coronation chairs and get their picture taken during this party. In 2003, Prince Andrew got a new nickname, Air Miles Andy, after he spent £325,000 on plane and helicopter flights for golf games, parties, and other trips that could have been easily made by car or train, royal train even. In 2004, he used a Royal Air Force jet to fly to Northern Ireland for another golf game at a royal garden party. In 2005, allegations began surfacing that Epstein was exploiting minors, which would eventually culminate in his 2008 sweetheart deal and conviction, where he only served 18 months and came and went as he pleased. In the meantime, in 2006, Andrew had Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Harvey Weinstein to Windsor Castle for his daughter, Princess Beatrice's birthday. It was a masked ball, and Epstein had just been charged with 1 count of solicitation. Andrew claimed that Ghislaine invited Epstein and that he, Andrew, wasn't aware of Epstein's charges. Do y'all believe that? I don't. In 2007, Andrew was photographed at a party in Saint-Tropez with a young American socialite, Chris Von Aspen, who was 25 at the time, and Andrew was 47. Pictures of them dancing at the party appear to show him sweating, which we all know he said in his 2019 interview is impossible. People who attended reported that they danced until about 3 a.m. 3 days later, Andrew was at another billionaire party in Saint-Tropez dancing with a Canadian socialite, Pascal Bourbeau. He's photographed sweating again, and people who attended later told the Mail Online that these were really crazy years for Andrew, that he was having a full-blown midlife crisis and basking in the attention he got from young women due to being a single prince. A video of him partying in the same area in 2008 resurfaced after his Newsnight interview. By July 2008, Jeffrey Epstein was serving that 18-month sentence for soliciting minors for prostitution. And in 2009, Virginia reached a settlement with Epstein. In 2008, Andrew also went on a Tunisian holiday with Tarek, a Libyan man who was convicted of gun smuggling in 2005. He reportedly helped to arrange meetings between Prince Andrew and the late dictator Colonel Gaddafi. Andrew seems to have had a really dark penchant for hanging around murderous dictators. In 2010, Prince Andrew flew to New York City and stayed in Epstein's home for 3 days. Paparazzi videoed him waving goodbye to a young woman from the door of Epstein's house, smiling at her and laughing. And December 2010, he was photographed taking a walk in the park with Epstein. During his Newsnight interview, Andrew claimed that he went there to be too honorable and tell Jeffrey in person that their friendship was over because, and I quote, "over the phone would be a chicken's way out." He vowed that he had never had contact with Epstein since then. However, emails have surfaced through court documents that refute that statement. The emails haven't been showed yet, but respected news outlets are reporting that they are dated February 2011 from Prince Andrew to Epstein, and that one says, "keep in close touch and we'll play again soon." Also in 2010, Sarah Ferguson was duped by the fake sheikh who recorded her attempting to sell access to the royal family. As usual with Fergie's fails, she made a sloppy apology to the public and kept stomping on. Her excuse is her financial distress because Fergie is understood to have taken a horrible deal and is proud of it because she told the Queen all she wanted from her divorce was the Queen's friendship. Now that is noble, but it wasn't noble to make the gesture of not going after money and then to fail to curb her lifestyle accordingly to live within her new limited means and then constantly get herself into embarrassing situations over money. I mean, if she wasn't prepared to live within the means of her divorce settlement being simply friendship from the Queen, she shouldn't have said it because that's about all she got. She ends up trying to sell access to the royals to shady characters in that undercover sting operation, and then later gets financial assistance from Jeffrey Epstein. In 2012, Andrew met a man who is suspected to be a Chinese spy, codenamed H6 in the UK. It's alleged that they became very close and remained close for years, with Andrew inviting him to palace parties twice. In 2020, Andrew's private secretary, Dominic Hampshire, wrote a letter to H6 that included this passage. I also hope that it is clear to you where you sit with my principal and indeed his family. You should never underestimate the strength of that relationship. Outside of his closest internal confidants, you sit at the very top of a tree that many, many people would like to be on. Well, what do y'all think that means? In 2013, Andrew appears to have kept relatively quiet. He was mistaken by police at one point in the year who failed to recognize him while he was in the palace ground gardens in the evening. And apparently, whenever they confronted and stopped him to see who he was, he displayed his usual temper at their mistake and threw a little tantrum, although he apologized later in the papers. December 30th, 2014, a Florida court filing alleged that Prince Andrew, along with other prominent people who have not been convicted, Virginia Giuffre while visiting Epstein. This filing was the beginning of Andrew's lifestyle and careless, entitled ways finally beginning to catch up to him. Regardless of criminality and convictions, his reckless way of living on a global stage, in my opinion, was never going to come to a good end. April 2015, specific allegations appear in court documents accusing Andrew of having sex with Virginia on Epstein's property 3 times. Oddly, around this time, the Queen decided to allow Sarah Ferguson to attend Royal Ascot with her. In my opinion, Andrew was always the Queen's biggest blind spot. She never wanted to believe anything negative about him. In 2016, there aren't many mentions of Andrew's scandals, but this is the year that the fake sheikh who fooled Sarah Ferguson had his identity revealed and was put in jail. She decided to sue him, alleging that he tricked her and ruined her reputation. She said that the year before he tricked her and exposed her, she made £750,000 in speaking engagements and appearances, and the year following, only $54,000. She told Oprah she'd been drinking and in the gutter when it happened, and it completely ruined her reputation. And she definitely sounded drunk in the video, but I mean, it's not the exposer who ruined her reputation. She ruined her reputation by doing an illegal thing while she was drunk. 2017 and 2018 were relatively quiet for Andrew. He managed to keep completing royal duties while rumors swirled in the court case against him from Virginia Giuffre slogged on. August 10th, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive in his cell, and I think we all assume that Andrew probably breathed a huge sigh of relief, figured that it would be smooth sailing from him here on, and these allegations would just go away, because the kingpin and the person who could really expose him was now dead. Andrew seems to have decided that now that Epstein was dead, it would be no problem to put all the rumors to rest and then continue on his merry royal Randy Andy life without these allegations and rumors hanging over his head. Within 3 months of Epstein's death, he had Emily Maitlis in Buckingham Palace in her cute little military-style jacket, and she was ready to grill him. He had no idea what was coming. He floundered through the interview with his ever-present arrogance, explaining how sex is a positive act for a man, and therefore he will definitely remember doing it. And that's a really, really weird thing to say. Like, does he think it's a negative act for a woman, and so they just immediately forget it? What on earth? Like, that's an alarming conclusion. Kind of makes me wonder how he came to that conclusion. Was it perhaps having concubines, as Sarah Ferguson described him having? Or having Virginia Giuffre handed to him by Epstein? She described herself as a sex slave to him during that time. I feel like those types of things might make a man have weird conclusions like Andrew showed. The Newsnight interview was, as they say in the UK, a total car crash. And it makes me question the Queen's mental state at the time. Honestly, I hate to do that, but it seems like if she were really on her game, that she would have known that it was a horrible idea for Andrew to do that interview, in spite of him being her favorite. I just feel like if she was as well and cognizant up to the last as the palace would like us to believe, and wasn't, maybe having some good days and some bad days, that interview wouldn't fly. I also suspect that she might have been kept somewhat in the dark since Princess Beatrice was there on side with Andrew, thinking this interview was going to be some glorious thing that cleared her dad of his association with that total creep that he invited to her 18th birthday. Beatrice could have had something to do with making the Queen think that this was going to be different than what it was. That's just my surmising. The fact that as soon as the interview was out and the reaction was in, she immediately ended his actual royal career forever makes me think that the real nature of the interview that he was going to do was hidden from her until it was already done. It's all been downhill from Andrew from there. Eventually, the Queen went further and removed all of his military titles and took away his HRH status. It's rumored that he still uses it privately and still requires his staff to use it. He made an Instagram post that was pretty ill-fated and got bad public response, and he had to delete about his time in the Falklands War, and he signed off Prince Andrew HRH or HRH Prince Andrew, something like that. So it's very clear that he still uses it. Now, his brother is king now and is trying to get him to leave that ostentatious royal lodge mansion that he can't justify and can't afford. But Fergie is apparently sick of him too. And even though they've lived there together pretty much since they were divorced, word is that she's ready to pack her bags and take a flight out. Some of the staff have leaked that Andrew's developed some really weird hobbies lurking around Royal Lodge, and he's started tracking airplanes and projecting their flight paths on walls, and alleged that he has a serious PORN addiction and a pile of teddy bears on the bed that apparently the servants must arrange exactly right every day or he'll scream at them. In the end, it's all a sad, dark end for someone who was really the most popular prince in the world, considered a war hero and the Queen's favorite son, although not an heir. What do you think Andrew's future and eventual end will be? Will he eventually accept his fate and try to find some redemption in a quiet life and charity, or keep struggling to get his beloved prince status he once had? Let me know in the comments, y'all.